Miss Karen Ellis checked her watch again and sighed. It was 8:17 a.m., and once more, Dion Jackson's desk sat empty while the rest of her sophomore English class had already started on their warm-up exercise. She had been teaching at Westbrook High for 15 years and prided herself on running a punctual, orderly classroom. The door creaked open slowly. Dion slipped in, trying not to draw attention. At 16, he was tall for his age with a quiet confidence that usually impressed teachers. But these days, Miss Ellis only noticed his tardiness. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet classroom. "How nice of you to join us." Again. Several students looked up from their notebooks. Dion mumbled a quick sorry and hurried to his seat, keeping his eyes down. This was the 12th time in 3 weeks that Dion had been late. Miss Ellis made a show of marking it in her attendance book, shaking her head slightly. What frustrated her most was that Dion had been one of her best students last semester. His essays showed real thought and creativity. But lately, his work was rushed and his participation minimal. Today we're discussing the themes of responsibility in To Kill a Mockingbird. Ms. Ellis continued. Something that requires showing up on time and being prepared. A few students exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dion took out his worn copy of the book and tried to find the right page. After class, Ms. Ellis asked Dion to stay behind. She noticed how tired he looked up close. There were dark circles under his eyes that she hadn't paid attention to before. "This is becoming a pattern, Dion," she said. "You were never late last semester. What's changed?" "Nothing, Ms. Ellis," Dion replied, shifting his weight from one foot to another. "Just running behind sometimes. It won't happen again." "That's what you said last week," she reminded him, "and the week before that." Dion looked at the floor. "My alarm didn't go off right. I'm sorry." Miss Ellis didn't believe him. She'd heard too many excuses from students over the years. "Dion, I'm going to have to call home about this. You're missing important class time every day." A flash of worry crossed Dion's face before he controlled it. "My grandmother works nights. She needs her sleep during the day." "Then maybe this will motivate you to get to school on time," Miss Ellis replied. "You live in the same neighborhood as Marcus and Tanya, and they're always here before the bell." Dion nodded silently and left when she dismissed him. Miss Ellis watched him go, noticing his shoelaces were untied and his backpack was missing its main zipper. Something seemed off, but she pushed the thought away. In her experience, being strict about attendance was the only way to get through to students who were developing bad habits. The next morning, Miss Ellis wasn't surprised when 8:15 came and went with no sign of Dion. The class was reviewing important material for their upcoming test. At 8:22, the door opened. Dion walked in, slightly out of breath. "Sorry," he said before she could speak. Miss Ellis felt her patience snap. The other students were managing to arrive on time. Why couldn't he? Whatever his reasons, she was tired of the disruption to her classroom. Something had to change, and she decided right then that tomorrow would be different. If Dion was late again, she would make sure he understood how serious this was. What she didn't know was that tomorrow would indeed. The next morning, Miss Ellis watched the clock with unusual intensity. The students settled into their seats, pulling out their copies of To Kill a Mockingbird for the day's discussion. The minute hand ticked past 8 o'clock, then 8:05, and finally reached 8:15. No Dion. "Today we'll be talking about courage," Miss Ellis announced. "About standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." The classroom door swung open at 8:23. Dion entered, his shirt untucked and his hair uncombed. He carried his books in his arms instead of his broken backpack. Something in Miss Ellis snapped. All of her frustration from the past 3 weeks boiled over. She had tried talking to him privately. She had given him chances. Nothing worked. Well, she said loudly, setting down her chalk. "Look who's decided to grace us with his presence." The room fell silent. Students exchanged nervous glances. Dion froze halfway to his desk. "I'm sorry, Miss Ellis," he said quietly. It won't happen again," she cut him off. "That's what you said yesterday, and the day before, and last week." Dion stood still, looking at the floor. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his books tighter. "Do you think your time is more valuable than everyone else's?" Miss Ellis continued, her voice rising. While the rest of the class manages to arrive on time, you seem to think the rules don't apply to you. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tanya, who sat near the front, stared hard at her desk. Maybe you don't care about your education, Miss Ellis said, but I have 27 other students who do. Your constant interruptions show disrespect for me and for them. She gestured around the room. Everyone else here lives in the same neighborhood. They take the same buses. They face the same weather. Yet somehow, they make it on time. The silence in the room grew heavier. Dion's shoulders slumped. His usual confidence seemed to disappear, making him look younger and smaller. What message do you think you're sending? Miss Ellis asked. That punctuality doesn't matter. That commitments aren't important. She didn't notice Marcus trying to catch her eye, or Jasmine shaking her head slightly. This behavior, Ms. Ellis continued, reinforces every negative stereotype that students like you are trying to overcome. The moment the words left her mouth, several students looked up in shock. Ms. Ellis hadn't exactly mentioned race, but everyone knew what she meant by students like you. Dion's expression hardened. He walked silently to his desk and sat down. He didn't open his book. He didn't look up. He just stared straight ahead. Miss Ellis felt a twinge of discomfort at his reaction but pushed it away. Sometimes students needed a wake-up call. She turned back to the board and continued with her lesson, though the energy in the room had completely changed. During group work, no one wanted to partner with Dion. He sat alone, scribbling in his notebook. When the bell rang, he was the first one out the door. In the hallway afterward, Miss Ellis overheard two students talking. That was harsh, one whispered. Yeah, the other replied. She doesn't know anything about him. Miss Ellis frowned. Of course she knew about her students. She had taught at this school for 15 years. She knew which students were serious about their education and which ones weren't. Still, as she prepared for her next class, she couldn't shake the image of Dion's face when she'd mentioned stereotypes. For the first time, she wondered if she had gone too far. She had no idea that the consequences of her words were already spreading through the school, or that tomorrow would bring a reckoning she wasn't prepared for. By lunchtime, word of Ms. Ellis's public scolding had spread throughout Westbrook High. In the teacher's lounge, opinions were divided. Karen's always been strict about punctuality, Mr. Rodriguez said, stirring his coffee, but singling out one student like that. The boy has been late every day for weeks, Ms. Winters countered. What was she supposed to do? Principal Davis stepped into the room, his face serious. He nodded at the teachers before approaching Ms. Ellis, who sat alone at a corner table. Karen, could I speak with you in my office after lunch? He asked quietly. Ms. Ellis felt her stomach tighten. Of course. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Dion sat by himself, pushing food around his tray without eating. His usual spot with the basketball team remained empty. Instead, he chose a table near the back, away from curious eyes and whispered conversations. Marcus, his teammate since middle school, finally approached. Hey man, you okay? Dion shrugged. It's whatever. That was messed up what Ms. Ellis said. Marcus continued, sitting down. Everyone thinks so. I don't care what she thinks, Dion said, though his voice lacked conviction. Tanya joined them, setting her tray down carefully. My mom called the school. She heard what happened from my little sister who's friends with your brother. Dion looked up, alarmed. What did she say about Jamal? Nothing bad, Tanya assured him. Just that Ms. Ellis was out of line. My mom's on the PTA. She's not letting this slide. Dion sighed. Great. More attention. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Dion dumped his untouched food in the trash. In Principal Davis's office, Ms. Ellis defended herself. I tried everything with him. Private conversations, warnings, staying after class. Nothing works. I understand your frustration, Principal Davis said, but I've received 4 calls from parents already. One mentioned possible racial discrimination. Ms. Ellis's face flushed. That's ridiculous. I would have said the same thing to any student who was consistently late. Would you have mentioned stereotypes to any student? Principal Davis asked, his expression neutral. Ms. Ellis fell silent. Put that way, she could see how her words might have been interpreted. I've known you for 12 years, Karen, the principal continued. You're one of our best teachers, but we need to handle this situation carefully. He slid a folder across his desk. This is Dion's file. His attendance was perfect until about a month ago. His grades have started slipping too. Something's going on. Ms. Ellis opened the folder. Dion's previous teachers had all noted his excellent work ethic and positive attitude. Nothing suggested a problem student. I've scheduled a meeting with his guardian tomorrow morning, Principal Davis said. I'd like you to be there. Later that afternoon, Miss Ellis noticed Dion's empty seat in her last period class. The school counselor confirmed he had been marked absent after lunch. Walking to her car after school, Miss Ellis overheard two students talking. Dion's not coming to practice today, one boy said. Coach is mad. Can't blame him for skipping, his friend replied. Not after this morning. That night, Miss Ellis had trouble sleeping. She had always prided herself on being fair. Had she singled out Dion? Would she have spoken the same way to a white student? The questions kept her awake long past midnight. The next morning, she arrived at school early to prepare for the meeting. As she passed Dion's empty desk, she felt a twinge of guilt. Maybe there was more to his story than she had allowed herself to consider. Tomorrow's meeting with his guardian might provide some answers, but Miss Ellis worried it might be too late to repair the damage she had caused. Miss Ellis arrived at school 45 minutes early, her mind racing with how to handle the upcoming meeting. She had prepared a folder with Dion's attendance record, assignment grades, and notes from her class. The evidence of his tardiness was clear, but now she wondered if she had missed something important. Principal Davis's office door was already open when she arrived. Inside, the school counselor, Mrs. Jimenez, sat in one of the chairs, reviewing some papers. Good morning, Miss Ellis said, trying to sound confident despite her nerves. Karen, Mrs. Jimenez nodded. I'm glad you're here early. There's something you should know before the meeting. Before she could continue, Principal Davis entered with a short, sturdy woman in her 60s. She wore scrubs under her coat and had the same warm brown eyes as Dion, though hers looked tired, with deep circles beneath them. Miss Ellis, this is Gloria Harris, Dion's grandmother and legal guardian. Principal Davis introduced them. Miss Ellis extended her hand. Thank you for coming in, Ms. Harris. The principal's office felt smaller as Mrs. Harris straightened in her chair. Her eyes were tired but determined as she pulled out her phone and opened the calendar app. This is what Dion's mornings look like, she said, placing the phone on the table. Alarm goes off at 5:00 a.m., not 5:30, not 6 o'clock. 5 in the morning, while it's still dark outside. Mrs. Jimenez leaned forward slightly. That's very early. Has to be, Mrs. Harris continued. I get home from my shift around 7:30, sometimes later if the next nurse is running behind. Someone has to get Keisha and Jamal ready for school. Miss Ellis felt her throat tighten. Dion gets his siblings ready for school? Every morning since their mama died, Mrs. Harris nodded. He makes their breakfast, helps them dress, does Keisha's hair, makes their lunches, and walks them to Jefferson Elementary. Principal Davis checked the district map on his wall. Jefferson is nearly a mile in the opposite direction from Westbrook High. Used to be closer to our old place, Mrs. Harris explained. But after those shootings on Maple Street last month, we had to move. The rent is higher, but at least the children are safer. Miss Ellis remembered the news reports. 3 people had been killed in a gang-related incident. She hadn't connected those events to any of her students. After Dion drops them off, he has to wait until a teacher arrives to open the doors at Jefferson, Mrs. Harris continued. They changed their policy after some incident last year. No children allowed inside before 7:50 a.m. And then he walks all the way back across town to get here, Ms. Jimenez said quietly, calculating the distances. Mrs. Harris turned to Ms. Ellis. You mentioned other students from our neighborhood who get here on time. Do any of them walk their younger siblings across town first? Ms. Ellis couldn't meet her eyes. No, ma'am. My grandson has been acting as the man of our house since he was 14, Mrs. Harris continued, her voice growing emotional. He never complained once. Not when we had to move, not when I asked him to take on more responsibility, not even when I couldn't afford to replace his torn backpack because the security deposit on our new apartment took everything we had. She pulled out another photo, this one showing Dion at what looked like a family dinner, his arm protectively around his little brother. 2 nights a week, I pick up extra shifts for the overtime pay, Mrs. Harris explained. Those nights, Dion cooks dinner, helps with homework, and puts the little ones to bed. Then he does his own schoolwork, often until midnight. Miss Ellis felt tears forming in her eyes as the full reality of Dion's life came into focus. Last week, Mrs. Harris continued, Jamal got sick at school. Dion had to leave during lunch to pick him up because I was sleeping after my shift. Did anyone notice he was absent that afternoon? Principal Davis nodded. It's in the attendance records. But no one connected the absences to his tardiness issues. And yesterday, Mrs. Harris said, her voice breaking slightly, after being humiliated in front of his classmates, my grandson still picked up his siblings from school. He still helped with homework. He still did the laundry because I had to work. The only thing different was that for the first time since his mother died, I found him crying in his room. The room fell silent. Miss Ellis felt a tear roll down her cheek as the weight of her misjudgment crashed down on her. While she had been focused on punctuality and classroom rules, Dion had been carrying adult responsibilities that would overwhelm most grown people. Mrs. Harris, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, I had no idea. That's the problem, isn't it? Mrs. Harris replied. You didn't ask. You just assumed. Miss Ellis sat frozen in her chair, her teacher's notepad untouched on her lap. Every assumption she had made about Dion collapsed around her. The lazy student she had humiliated was actually carrying the weight of an entire family on his young shoulders. She started, then stopped. For the first time in her 15-year teaching career, words failed her completely. Principal Davis broke the uncomfortable silence. Mrs. Harris, I want to apologize on behalf of Westbrook High. We clearly failed to understand Dion's situation. Mrs. Harris's expression softened slightly. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to find solutions. Dion wants his education. He's smart. Smarter than I ever was. But he needs help, not punishment. Ms. Jimenez pulled out a notepad. We might be able to arrange some assistance through our community support programs. There's also the morning bus service for Jefferson Elementary that Dion's siblings might qualify for. While they discussed possibilities, Miss Ellis remained silent, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Dion struggling to keep his eyes open during first period. The worn-out shoes he never replaced. How he always saved half his lunch in a paper bag. She now realized it was probably for his siblings. Miss Ellis. Principal Davis's voice broke through her thoughts. Do you have anything to add? She looked up, meeting Mrs. Harris's tired but dignified gaze. Something broke inside Miss Ellis, a dam of emotions she usually kept carefully controlled. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I judged him without knowing anything. A sob escaped her, surprising everyone, including herself. Mrs. Harris handed her a tissue from her purse. Teachers are human too. Miss Ellis shook her head, trying to compose herself. What I said in class, about stereotypes, it was inexcusable. I've been teaching for 15 years, and she couldn't finish the sentence. Still have blind spots. Mrs. Harris offered gently. We all do. All these years, I thought I was treating every student equally by holding them to the same standards. Ms. Ellis continued, the words pouring out now. But equal treatment isn't always fair treatment, is it? Not when students are starting from such different places. Principal Davis nodded. That's something we all need to remember. Miss Ellis wiped her eyes. Mrs. Harris, I need to make this right with Dion. Would you allow me to apologize to him directly? That would mean a lot to him, Mrs. Harris replied. But he's proud, like his mother was. For the next 20 minutes, they developed a plan. Jefferson Elementary agreed to accept Keisha and Jamal into their early morning program, starting at 7:00 a.m. The social services coordinator would help Mrs. Harris apply for additional support. And Ms. Ellis volunteered to tutor Dion twice a week after school to help and catch up on the material he had missed. As the meeting concluded, Ms. Ellis walked Mrs. Harris to her car. The morning sun was bright, and other teachers and students were beginning to arrive for the day. Mrs. Harris, Ms. Ellis said as they reached the parking lot, thank you for being so gracious. Most parents would have demanded I be fired. Mrs. Harris looked at her thoughtfully. What good would that do? Dion still needs to learn English. And maybe you needed to learn something too. I certainly did, Miss Ellis admitted. Besides, Mrs. Harris continued, my daughter always said that when someone shows you they can do better, give them the chance to prove it. She opened her car door. I'll tell Dian to come to school tomorrow. On time, hopefully. As Mrs. Harris drove away, Miss Ellis stood in the parking lot, watching the car disappear around the corner. The bell would ring soon, calling her to teach literature to teenagers who each carried their own invisible stories. For the first time in years, she felt like a student again, faced with the most important lesson of her career. The next morning, Miss Ellis arrived at school an hour earlier than usual. She had barely slept, her mind busy planning what she would say to Dion and how she would address her class. She arranged her classroom differently, moving Dion's desk closer to the front where he could easily slip in if he was late. At 8:10, students began filing in, many of them whispering when they saw Miss Ellis already at her desk instead of making her usual dramatic entrance after the bell. They noticed the changed seating arrangement but said nothing. The clock ticked past 8:15. No Dion. Good morning, everyone, Miss Ellis began, her voice more gentle than usual. Before we start, I want to talk about something important. The students looked up, surprised by her serious tone. I made a mistake yesterday, she said simply. I spoke to a fellow student in a way that was hurtful and unfair. I judged without understanding, and I was wrong. The classroom fell completely silent. Teachers at Westbrook High rarely admitted mistakes, especially not Miss Ellis. When Dion comes in today, I'll be apologizing to him personally, but I owe all of you an apology too, because I set a poor example. Tanya raised her hand hesitantly. Is Dion okay? We've been texting him, but he hasn't answered. He's going through some difficult family circumstances, Miss Ellis replied carefully, but it's not my place to share his personal business. That's part of what I got wrong. Just then, the door opened. Dion stood there, wearing a clean but slightly wrinkled shirt. The class turned to stare at him. Good morning, Dion, Miss Ellis said warmly. We're just getting started. Your seat is here now. She gestured to the desk she had prepared. Dion looked confused but walked to the new desk, keeping his eyes down as he sat. As I was saying, Miss Ellis continued, I've been thinking about our study of To Kill a Mockingbird. Remember what Atticus Finch says about understanding others? She picked up the book and read aloud. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. She closed the book and looked directly at Dion. I failed to do that. I didn't try to understand your situation before judging it. I'm truly sorry, Dion. The classroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. Dion looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time in weeks. It's okay, Miss Ellis, he said quietly. No, it's not okay, she replied. But I'm going to work to make it right. She then explained to the class about the new morning program at Jefferson Elementary that would allow Dion's siblings to be dropped off earlier, though she kept many personal details private. She announced that they would be starting a new unit on perspective taking in literature. And one more thing, she added. Principal Davis and I will be starting a morning study hall at 7:30 for any student who needs a quiet place to work or eat breakfast. It's completely optional, but everyone is welcome. After class, Miss Ellis asked Dion to stay for a moment. I spoke with your grandmother yesterday, she said. She's an impressive woman. Dion nodded. She works really hard. So do you, Miss Ellis replied. I've arranged for you to have access to the school's computer lab during lunch if you need to catch up on assignments, and I'd like to help you with anything you've missed. You don't have to do that, Dion said, looking uncomfortable. I know I don't have to, Miss Ellis said. I want to. That's different. As Dion gathered his books to leave, Miss Ellis noticed his torn backpack. Wait, she said, reaching into her closet. My son left for college last year. He won't miss this. She handed Dion a barely used blue backpack. Dion hesitated before taking it. Thank you. See you tomorrow, Dion, she said. On time or not, we'll be here. For the first time in weeks, Dion smiled slightly as he left the room. 2 months passed at Westbrook High. The April morning sunshine streamed through Miss Ellis's classroom windows as students worked in small groups. In the corner nearest her desk, Dion sat with Marcus and Tanya, leading a discussion about their final project. I think we should focus on how the characters change when they learn something new about each other, Dion suggested, his confidence having returned in recent weeks. Miss Ellis smiled as she overheard him. The transformation in her classroom since February had been remarkable. The morning study hall she had started now regularly hosted 15 students. Some came for the quiet study space, others for the free breakfast, and a few simply because they needed somewhere warm to be before school started. After the bell rang and students filed out for lunch, Principal Davis appeared at her door. "How's everything going, Karen?" he asked, stepping inside. "Better than I expected," she replied honestly. Dion hasn't been late once since the Jefferson Elementary morning program started. His grades are back up too. Principal Davis nodded. "I've noticed. The basketball coach says he's back to his old self on the court as well." Miss Ellis gathered some papers from her desk. "And Mrs. Harris? How is she doing with the community support services?" "Good news there," Principal Davis smiled. "The hospital agreed to change her shifts. She's working days now, which means she's home in the evenings with the children." "That's wonderful," Miss Ellis said, genuinely pleased. Dion mentioned he's been able to join the math club after school now that he doesn't have to rush home. They walked together toward the cafeteria. Through the large windows, they could see students gathered in groups across the sunny courtyard. Dion sat with his basketball teammates, laughing at something Marcus had said. "You know," Principal Davis said, "the district wants to use what happened as a case study for teacher training. They're not naming names, of course." Miss Ellis felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure I want to be known as the teacher who publicly humiliated a student." "That's not how they're framing it," he assured her. "It's about recognizing our blind spots and finding better ways to support students with difficult home situations." Inside the cafeteria, Miss Ellis noticed Mrs. Jimenez waving them over to her table. "I was just telling Mrs. Harris about Dion's improved participation," the counselor said as they joined her. Mrs. Harris looked much less tired than she had that February morning. Her uniform was still crisp, despite having already worked half her shift at the hospital. "I can't thank you all enough," she said. "Having mornings less rushed has made all the difference for our family." "Dion did all the hard work," Miss Ellis replied. "I just got out of his way." Mrs. Harris shook her head. "You did more than that. You showed him that people can learn and change. That matters to a young black man his age." Later that afternoon, Miss Ellis asked her class to write a reflective essay about a time they misjudged someone or something. As the students wrote quietly, she worked on her own reflection for the teacher training program. "The most important lesson I've learned in 15 years of teaching," she wrote, "is that fairness doesn't always mean treating everyone exactly the same. Sometimes it means understanding what each person carries when they walk through your door." She looked up to see Dion focused on his paper, writing steadily. The torn backpack was gone, replaced by the blue one she had given him. But the change that mattered most wasn't visible from the outside. When the final bell rang, Dion stopped at her desk on his way out. "Miss Ellis," he said, "my grandmother wants to know if you can come to dinner next week. Keisha and Jamal want to meet you." "I'd be honored," she replied, meaning it completely. As Dion left with his friends, Miss Ellis realized that the classroom wasn't just a place where students learned from teachers. When it worked as it should, everyone learned from each other, growing beyond the limitations of their own perspectives into something wiser and more complete than before.